How bittersweet to be a branch on the true vine. My wife suggested that we visit one of my childhood homes, the one in western North Carolina, to show the kids where I went to elementary school, there in the foothills of the Great Smoky Mountains. My memories are from the ground, all laid out in front of me. The elementary school, where I went to school from kindergarten through 5th grade, was right across the road from my house, to the right. So I walked. It took a little while because even though the one end of the building nearest to the house had an entryway, they wanted you to enter by the main entrance in the middle of the building. Now, the kindergarten and 1st grade unit was behind the main building, but from there, you worked your way down the hall from one end of the main building, starting in 2nd grade, year by year, all the way to the other end in 6th grade. Next to the school building was a house set back from the road in a field where Mr. Johnson lived. Right next to his house was a little patch of woods where the abandoned house was, which was haunted. We knew it was haunted because our moms and dads strictly forbade us from going over there. So when we went over there, we went in broad daylight when it was impossible for ghosts to come out. They were in there, though, and we knew it because when big red-headed Adam climbed up the stairs to the 2nd floor, one of the steps gave way under his feet. And we would have all run away, except that we weren't going to leave our friend Adam hanging from the 2nd-story landing. I mean, who was going to tell his mom? "What do you see up there?" we asked him as he tried to pull himself up. "More rooms," he said. "Oh, so it is haunted," we all said, because everyone knows that ghosts live upstairs where there are rooms to hide in, and they keep their monsters in the basement, which was a problem because Adam was stuck on the upstairs landing, and a big hole in the staircase threatened to suck him into the basement. Eventually, before dark, Adam worked up the courage to jump over the hole, and when he landed, he kept running, the first one out of the house. Now, behind my house was a bigger patch of woods, which led down to a creek. When my mom threw me out of the house during summer afternoons, the door would slam behind me before she even got the words "go play" out of her mouth, and we'd go down into the woods toward the creek, me and my best friends, whose moms had also thrown them out of the house, down to the creek to learn the difference between a garden snake and a water moccasin. During the winter, you could almost literally jump out of the back door onto a sled, the kind with metal runners, and sled down the slope all the way to the creek. The idea was to use the trees as a way to bank into a turn, not to run into it, which happened on occasion, and also to not get so much speed that you sledded right over the 8-foot embankment into the creek, which happened once to my friend, and we nearly died laughing when it happened. Right after my wife suggested we pay a visit, I did the Google Maps thing on the internet where you can zoom in from a satellite picture and even land on the road right in front of the place there. I called it up on the screen, and neither of the houses across the road are there. Neither Mr. Johnson's house, where a real person lived, nor the haunted house, where figments of our imagination lived. Bulldozers have plowed them under. Ghosts, monsters, relics of a life lived, all scraped off the face of the earth. The school is gone, also scraped off the face of the earth by bulldozers. In its place is one of those newfangled complexes where schooling is a world of different from the way it was when I was a kid. The woods behind my house is gone. The creek is there, but now it runs through one of those concrete half culverts, and it is surrounded by a residential subdivision. On Saturday nights during the summer, I used to fall asleep to the sound of the North Wilkesboro NASCAR racetrack, which was set in a valley just over the rise there. Not even that is the same. No, we're not going to stop by and visit my childhood home. That's where my southern accent was given to me. That's where my happiest memories were created. That's where my earliest impressions about life and what it meant to be alive came to be. And all the things belonging to that time of my life are changed irrevocably. Looking at that satellite picture was like having a bandage suddenly torn off my chest. Boy, did that hurt. You know, when we went to school back in the 1970s and the 1980s, we were being schooled to work in the factory, either on the floor or in management. When I moved here in 2004, I was struck by a sense among the old-timers that if they could keep everything the same, all the external things, the buildings, the traditions, the way of thinking, if they kept everything the same, then Bethlehem Steel would come back to Buffalo along with its jobs, with its prosperity, with all the high times, and everything would be good again, and the GM plant would hire again, and Harrison would need a few thousand more employees. As time went on, and it became painfully obvious that those good times were not going to roll back, anger started to flow freely. I can understand anger. Change hurts. A fellow named Cletus once said a long time ago, "You know, you can never step into the same river twice." He made a point of making it personal. You, personally, can never step into the same river twice. Change comes like a river comes, taking away what used to be there and adding something that wasn't there before, and we are dismayed. It hurts us personally. This same fellow had a friend who tried to be clever by one more, and he said, "You can never step into the same river once." And he concluded, why even bother? If it's going to change, then why don't we just eat, drink, and be merry now and forget about everything else? "Nice try," said Cletus, "but really, the river is you. You change. You are not the same from one moment to the next." And then one day, can you imagine if I had brought up that satellite picture of my childhood home and nothing had changed? Everything was the same. How much more would that have hurt? Would I want that school churning out kids prepared to work in a factory that isn't there? Would I want a woods full of snakes instead of a neighborhood full of people whose kids are getting their own first impressions? Would I want a decrepit, dangerous old house across the road? But what about Mr. Johnson? Didn't we love Mr. Johnson? Yes, we did. Yes, we did. Change hurts. "The Father is the vine dresser," says Jesus. "Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away." Now that much we can understand, right? And it makes us wonder whether change comes because he's mad at us, which means we fight harder to keep things the same because we don't want to admit that maybe we do not bear fruit. But Jesus sets our minds at ease with his next words, words that anyone who has ever dressed a vine knows in his heart from experience. "Every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes, that it may bear more fruit." More than a handful of you in here prune grapevines every year. You can tell us, are you angry at the vine when you prune it? Now, you might be in a bad mood in general because it's so cold and snowy out during the pruning season, but no one is angry at the vine when he prunes it. God is not angry at you when he prunes you. The thing is, we are not nerveless plants. We feel pain. And while we're feeling pain, we wonder why God would ever do us such a thing. Our buildings, our traditions, our songs, our way of life, all of it is ripe for pruning. And there's nothing you can do but get angry at the Father for doing it. Your religious traditions are especially ready for pruning, not because they are bad, not necessarily anyway, not because they are bad, not because you're bad, but because they bore fruit. And now it's time for the pruning. Snip. So that something new might grow in its place. Something that might bear more fruit. Moreover, about these religious traditions, buildings, songs, religious ways of thinking, we grow to love those things to the extent that we grow to love them. Losing our first love, Jesus Christ, the true vine. Remember, you yourselves change. You are changing. The buildings, traditions, songs, ways of doing things must change with you, like a vine that is experiencing growth. If you're not changing, you're not growing. If you're not growing, then you're dying. And look, if you're dying, you're changing. Why do you die anyway? Is God angry at you? Is God pruning you from the land of the living because he's mad at you and he doesn't want you to be alive anymore? No, absolutely not. You are a branch of the true vine. Jesus himself, the Son of God, was cut off, as it says in Isaiah. He was cut off. The prophet says about him that he is like a root out of dry ground, the true vine. And he was cut off. For what? For what did Jesus die? For resurrection, my friends, to come back to life. There's a fellow who sometimes skates with me and my boys. He was born in 1963. I know that because every time I see him, once a week for 3 years now, he tells us he was born in 1963. Oh, he says, the 1960s were the greatest years in the history of the world. It was the greatest decade. And since then, everything has changed for the worse. And he says this in front of my kids, my young men. I wouldn't want to be a kid in these awful days. I can't disagree with him more. Cannot disagree more. If I were a little kid and I saw that God was busily pruning, I'd be excited, bouncing up and down, because where God is busily pruning, there will be growth. We are obviously in a time of pruning, which means that for all of us, little children especially, the resurrection is at hand. How bittersweet to be a branch on the true vine.